Imagine standing in the center of hell, not once, but twice. Imagine the sun falling from the sky, melting the world around you into a landscape of gray ash and twisted metal. Most people would call it a miracle to survive a nuclear blast. But to survive two? That is not just a miracle. That is the story of Tsutomu Yamaguchi, the man who saw the end of the world and lived to tell us why it must never happen again. This is a journey through the darkest shadows of human history, seen through the eyes of a man who was simply trying to go home. Welcome to the channel. Today we are diving deep into a story that defies the laws of probability and showcases the incredible resilience of the human spirit. If you value history that moves the soul, you are in the right place. The summer of 1945 in Japan was a time of suffocating heat and constant anxiety. The air was thick with the scent of sea salt and the tension of a world at war. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was a young engineer for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. He was 29 years old, a husband and a father. He was a man of logic and blueprints, someone who understood how things were built, not how they were obliterated. On August 6, 1945, Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima. It was his final day of a 3-month business trip. He was excited. He missed his wife, Hisako, and their infant son, Katsutoshi. He was already thinking about the quiet life back in Nagasaki. He walked toward the shipyard for one last day of work. But then he realized he had forgotten his hanko, his personal identification stamp. He turned back toward the bus station to retrieve it. This small, mundane act of forgetfulness would save his life and then place him directly in the path of a nightmare. As he walked back toward the shipyard around 8:15 in the morning, the sky was a brilliant, clear blue. There was a faint hum in the air, the sound of a lone American B-29 bomber, the Enola Gay, high above. Most people in Hiroshima didn't even look up. It was just one plane. Then the world disappeared. Yamaguchi saw a flash of light so bright it felt like the sun had exploded inside his eyes. It was a magnesium flare that blinded the horizon. He had just enough time to dive into a ditch before the sound hit. It wasn't a bang, it was a roar that tore the atmosphere apart. The shockwave picked him up and spun him like a leaf in a hurricane. He was tossed through the air and slammed into the ground. When he opened his eyes, the world was gone. The bright morning had been replaced by a terrifying, suffocating darkness. Dust and ash hung so thick in the air that the sun was a faint, sickly copper disk. Silence followed the roar, a heavy, unnatural silence, broken only by the crackle of fires starting in every direction. Yamaguchi looked at his arms. The skin was peeling off like wet tissue paper. He had been less than 2 miles from ground zero. His face and forearms were severely burned. His left eardrum was ruptured. He was bleeding, disoriented, and terrified, but he was alive. He crawled toward the shipyard, passing ghosts. People were walking with their arms outstretched, their skin hanging in ribbons, their eyes wide with a shock that transcended physical pain. They were looking for water, for help, for a reality that no longer existed. Yamaguchi found his colleagues who had also survived by a stroke of luck. They spent a night of agony in an air raid shelter, listening to the screams of a city burning to the ground. The next morning, Yamaguchi knew he had to get out. He had to get to Nagasaki. He dragged his broken body through the ruins of Hiroshima, crossing rivers filled with the dead. The bridges were gone, and the heat was still unbearable. He eventually reached the train station, which miraculously was still functional on the outskirts. He boarded a train packed with the burned and the dying. As the train pulled away, he looked back at the charred remains of the city. He thought he was leaving the horror behind. He thought he was heading towards safety. He had no idea that the shadow of the wing was following him. He was traveling 300 kilometers south, straight back into the heart of the target. He arrived in Nagasaki on August 8th. His wife and child didn't recognize him at first. He was covered in bandages, his skin blackened, his spirit shattered. He went to the hospital, but it was overwhelmed. He went home, hoping for peace. On the morning of August 9th, despite his horrific injuries, Yamaguchi showed up at the Mitsubishi office in Nagasaki. He wanted to report what had happened. He sat across from his supervisor, a man who refused to believe the story. The supervisor laughed, asking how a single bomb could destroy an entire city. He told Yamaguchi he was being dramatic, that it was impossible. Yamaguchi started to explain the light, the heat, the way the buildings turned to dust. And then, at 11:02 in the morning, the light returned. The window of the office exploded. The same blinding white flash filled the room. The same roar, the same crushing pressure. Yamaguchi dropped to the floor as the office disintegrated around him. His bandages were blown off. His wounds were reopened. The second atomic bomb, Fat Man, had just detonated over Nagasaki. Yamaguchi had survived the impossible twice in 3 days. He emerged from the wreckage of his office to find his home city in the same state of ruin as Hiroshima. He ran through the falling black rain, frantic to find his family. His house had been destroyed, but by a stroke of fate, his wife and son had been out buying medicine for his burns when the bomb fell. They had taken cover in a tunnel. They were alive. In the days that followed, the radiation sickness set in. His hair fell out. His wounds refused to heal. He vomited incessantly. Most people thought he would die. But Tsutomu Yamaguchi was a man of quiet, stubborn strength. He didn't just survive, he endured. In the weeks following the Nagasaki blast, Tsutomu Yamaguchi became a shadow of a man. His skin was a map of charred geography, and his hair fell out in clumps. The black rain, a sticky, radioactive fallout, had soaked into the soil and the skin of every survivor. He spent days in a high fever, drifting between consciousness and a recurring nightmare of white light. But while the bombs had broken the city, they had not broken his will to provide. As Japan surrendered and the smoke cleared, Yamaguchi began the agonizing process of healing. He didn't just want to survive, he wanted to witness. For decades, he lived a quiet life. He worked as a translator for the American occupation forces and later became a teacher. He raised his children in a world that was rapidly trying to forget the horror he carried in his very bones. For a long time, Yamaguchi remained silent about being a Niju Hibakusha, a double atomic bomb survivor. He felt that his story was too heavy, perhaps even too unbelievable for a world moving toward high-tech prosperity. It wasn't until his later years, specifically after the death of his son, who had suffered from the lifelong effects of radiation, that Yamaguchi decided he could no longer stay quiet. At the age of 80, he wrote a memoir. At 90, he traveled to the United Nations in New York to speak. He stood before the world, a small man with a voice that shook the room, and said, "I have been granted a miracle, and it is my duty to tell you that these weapons must never exist again." He was the only person officially recognized by the Japanese government as a survivor of both blasts, though others likely existed and perished in the shadows. Tsutomu Yamaguchi passed away in 2010 at the age of 93. He lived a full life, seeing the birth of grandchildren and the transformation of his country. He proved that even when the sun falls twice, the human heart can still find the strength to beat, to love, and to warn the future. His life remains the ultimate testament to peace. If this story of incredible survival moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We bring you the most powerful stories from history that the world should never forget. Click the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into the human spirit.